What if I told you that this background right here was created with just a single CSS property? Before we begin, this video is sponsored by Linode. Now, Linode supplies servers that let you deploy apps, sites, and services that are both flexible and scalable. Linode's one-click apps make it easy to set up a web stack or a WordPress instance in under a minute. Simple pricing starting at $5 per month ensures there's no hidden fees or surprise bills. So sign up with the link below and use this code right here to receive a free $20 credit on your Linode account. Hey everyone, what's up? Gary Simon of Coursetro.com. So today we're going to be talking about backgrounds and the interesting things that you can do with them with the CSS background property. So just to give you a few examples, at gradientmagic.com, there's a lot of interesting backgrounds that probably some of you didn't even know you could create solely with a single CSS background property. And these backgrounds are achievable through the linear gradient property and also the repeating linear gradient and also repeating radial gradient as well. So I'm going to show you exactly how to get up and running and kind of explain step by step how this works. All right, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's get started. All right, so before we begin, yes, I will mention the obvious, and that is my torso is transparent. This happens to be because Linode.com, my new sponsor for the pre-roll ad videos that you see here, has sent me a green t-shirt, and therefore I'm using a green screen so it gets keyed out. Cool stuff. All right, so let's begin. So all we're doing here, I have an index.html, no HTML tags we're using for this tutorial, and we're just using, we're just linking here to our CSS main CSS file, and I'm using Sass here, although we're not using any features. I don't even know why I did it. It's just kind of a, you know, a creature of habit. So let's go ahead and we're going to start with very absolute basics. So background. Oh wait, we might want to specify the actual selector. Wow, it's a little bit late. My brain's not working too well. Background red. All right, that's the tutorial, and I hope you learned a lot. I'm going to go, and I'll see you guys soon. All right, so that's me trying to be funny. I probably shouldn't do that ever again. Let's go ahead and get started for the real purpose. So we're going to start with linear gradient. All right, so linear gradient, we're not going to start with the repeating linear gradient. First, I want to make sure you understand what linear gradient is. All right, so we can, at the very least, start with two parameters going from one color to another. So let's just say red to blue, where you have to put in height 100% or viewport height or whatever. All we have is just a basic, two color stops from red to blue. Very, very simple stuff. You can also add in an endless amount of other values, yellow. And of course, these can be RGB, these can be hex. You can use a lot of different properties to get the actual color in there. We can also change the degree, the rotation. So you specify it in the DEG for degree unit. All right, very, very simple. That yellow is making that look horrendous. All right, there we go. We can also, instead of specifying a degree, we can say to right, to bottom, top, left, etc. So to right, for instance. Very, very simple. We can also put in, along with each of the color stops, we can specify a unit or a value of some sort in terms of percentages. So we want this to go 80% to show mostly red, and then we can just put in maybe blue will be at 90%. All right, so you can control how much of the color is occupying the available space in the container. So if you wanted to create not a gradient but just a hard stop, you would make both of those values equal to each other. So let's just do 60 and 60%. Not 690, come on, Gary. And there you go. It's like a perfect pixel, going right straight across. And we can, of course, do this as well, as mentioned before. And by the way, you can do negative values just like that, as you can see. Very, very simple. So now that we understand how linear gradient itself works, which is dead simple, let's start talking about the repeating linear gradient. So let's put this on a new line. just so we have some space here. I'm going to get height. We're going to put that up here just to get everything kind of out of the way. So repeating linear gradient. So this will allow you to specify linear gradients essentially, but you can separate them and you can repeat them a bunch of times. So you create like a pattern effect of your gradients. All right, so let's get an example. So let's just do red, purple. All right, so if you don't, basically it's only going to repeat once if you don't specify any other values and you keep it dead simple like this, which why would you do this? Oh, repeating. There we go. It does the same thing, even if you just have repeating linear gradient versus just linear gradient itself. So you actually have to specify some other values for it to make sense. All right, so what we'll do here is we'll specify at the end of purple, let's just do 50 pixels. So now every 50 pixels, it's going to repeat this linear gradient. All right, so hopefully that should make sense. We can also specify a value for red itself. So we can do 50 pixels here and then maybe 60 pixels there. All right. So we can also put in multiple color values. So let's take this one off, more than 2 rather. So we'll say purple is 50 pixels and then we'll say green for 60 pixels. All right, so you can do any amount of colors, and it's fairly simple at this point to understand, but you'll see we're going to get a little bit more intense here shortly. So let's try, for instance, taking and turning this. So you should know this by just working with linear gradient. If we want to rotate 45 degrees, all right. Very, very good. We can now let's begin to actually experiment with mixing and layering our values here to create something that's a little bit more interesting, and also working with what's called transparent as a substitute for one of these color values. That's where you can really get into the interesting checkered pattern sort of thing. All right, so let's go ahead and let's put in first a linear gradient. So what's cool about the background property is you can specify multiple different things such as linear gradient, and then you can put a comma after it, and then have a repeating linear gradient, which is what we're going to do. So let's first just create a linear gradient, 45 degrees. We're going to do RGB for this time, 76, 0, 255. I'll show you how to get to that easily in a second. And we're going to make this transparent. All right, so for now, we're just going to end it there. And when you specify transparent, this is literally transparent right here. This is just the background, the normal background color. What we can do here also for this RGB value, when you hover over the actual value or this RGB function right here, it will give you this pop-up, so you can change the values automatically like that, by the way. All right, so let's start to mix this with a repeating linear gradient as well. So I'm going to get rid of that and put a comma here. And we're going to specify repeating linear gradient. All right. So we're going to put in 45 degrees as well. You don't have to, but I'm just choosing to do that. We're going to put in RGB 183, 0, and 255. And after that, we're going to put 0%. So it's going to start at 0%. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to expand this so you can see the whole thing because it's going to get a little bit long. So next up, we're going to specify for the next color stop, RGB 183, 0, and 255. Same exact color. And we're going to say this will go to 5%. All right, so right now, let's put a semicolon on here and let's save it. nothing is really changed, but what we need to do is specify an actual color value right before repeating linear gradient. So I'm going to put in RGB 216, 118, and 255. That happens to be like this pinkish color. It's a little bit lighter than this. Save that. And we're not seeing anything quite yet because we need to fill this out a little bit more. So we have it rotated at 45 degrees. We have a color stop from 0% and also to 5%, but they're the same color. Next, what we want to do is add in transparent. And we'll say going from 5%, and this will create kind of like a hard color stop because we're going 5% and then 5%. It's going to end or start off where this one ends. And then put transparent again, 10%. So there's going to be from 5, basically a total of 5%. It's going to be just transparent, and there's going to be a hard color stop, just like that. Very, very cool stuff, isn't it? So you may be wondering, like this value right here, if we remove that, save it, that value allows us to override the fact that we have a transparent value right here. So whatever we specify here, this will show up as a background. So I'll just leave that in for now. All right, so next up, let's go ahead and add in a couple more things. So first, what we'll do is we're going to add in yet another repeating linear gradient after these values up here. So get rid of that right there and put a comma. So what I want to do now is move this. So this RGB value right here is going to end up being wherever the last repeating linear gradient that we have. We're just going to have 2 anyways. Did I just change that color? Yeah, I did. Stop that. There we go. All right, so now we're going to have a repeating linear gradient as well. And this time we're going to change the direction in terms of the rotation. So linear gradient. So this time it's going to be negative 45 degrees. And then we're going to have our RGBA. It's going to be the same exact, except we're going to be using alpha this time, if that makes sense. So we're going to add in the alpha value. Doing so will allow us to see the other layer beneath it right here. And I'll demonstrate that. But we're going to use the same color value. So 183, 0, 255. And then we also have to specify the alpha value because we're using RGBA. We're going to say 0.5 and then also 0% here. And we're basically going to do the same thing, the same sort of setup, except just change it up a little bit. So right here, comma, we'll put in this time, this is going to go to 5%. And then this one will be transparent to 5% and 10% at the end. All right, so let's try this. And look at that. So if we were to make this, let me bring this in a bit. These alphas right here, like if we just made them RGBs, or to simulate that, we'll just put 1. And if I save it, just check out that you won't be able to see underneath them nearly as much or at all. So you can see how that has affected it. So you can use RGBA to really make them interact more so than usual. All right, so let's experiment a little bit further just to show that you can do a lot more than just a boring little checker pattern like this. Even though it looks kind of cool because we do have this cool gradient where it's, you know, more so than just a checkered pattern. Let's take a look at our middle line right here, our first one. Let's add a few more color stops to it. So we're going to begin at the end here, and we're going to specify an RGB value using the same values right here. I'm just going to copy this, and let's see here. No, we didn't want to do that. We wanted to put, yeah, right inside the closing parenthesis. We're going to put another comma. And then RGBAs, this time it's going to start from 10%. All right, so it's picking up exactly where this left off to create a hard color stop right there. Otherwise, if this becomes 11% or whatever, then it will create kind of like a gradient effect. And I don't want that for this particular use case. So we're going to put in a comma here. And then we're also going to have the same color again, RGB there. And this time it'll go to 11%. So we're just going up from 10% of the available space, so it's relative. We're just using a body element, obviously, to 11%, only 1%, so it's going to be small. And then we have to put in, we're going to put in transparent. And because if you don't put in transparent at the end, then this value is going to run into the beginning value as it repeats, and you won't be able to see a separation of lines, which is kind of what we're trying to create. So this, again, to create a hard stop, we do the same values here, and then transparent, we'll do like 13%. So we'll save it, and there we go. We just created this smaller line by adjusting these values. And you can see if you, for instance, a lot of this is all about experimenting with these values big time, by the way. So like if you change this to like 18%, it's going to decrease the amount of times that the pattern repeats, especially when you're using percentage values. So if you shoot this all the way up to like, I don't know, 30%, we only see it changing a couple times. So that leads me to the next point here. You can always adjust these. Instead of using percentage values, you can use pixel values as well. So that's what we're going to do, along with a couple of other things. All right, so okay, so our middle line, before we get to changing these to pixel values, we're going to change this. We're going to change the middle line here to RGBAs right here. So each one of these, we're going to change the RGBA here at 0.5. And in fact, I'm just going to copy all of them and then just paste them over right here, because I really want to see everything. I want to create more of like just an interesting look as we go through these. There we go. So we'll save it, see what that has done there. Now we can really start to see them interact and have yourself a little bit more of a not necessarily a dynamic, but a more interesting looking background gradient. Now let's get to the part where we change these to pixel values now. All right, so we have our bottom line, which is what we're going to focus on now, and we have our RGBA. We're going to change this here from percentages to pixels, and we are going to do this for each one so that you can see how these interact with each other, which is quite cool. So the next one, we have our 5% value here. So we'll make this 30 pixels. I'm going to save this just so you can see how it starts to change up. And then for transparent right here, this is going to go from 30 pixels to, let's say, 45 pixels. And there you go. So you can see how drastically it changed just by experimenting with and adjusting the values from the relative unit of percentages here to the more absolute unit of pixels. And that's how you can really begin to expand on and create some of the crazy, really intricate background patterns that you can see. For instance, on sites like this gradientmagic.com, which is really cool. These checkered patterns, these are all created using the methods that I just showed you. As you can see, you can get quite crazy with a lot of these. For instance, we just go to standard. Oh, we don't want standard. We want the regular one that shows up here. This one right here is insane. The CSS property for this one, if we copy the CSS and we go back to our code editor here, and we replace all this stuff, you can see how long this is. Look at all of that. Very, very cool. So they can get quite complex. If we save it, of course, it does work in the browser. Awesome, awesome stuff. All right, so hopefully you found that interesting. If you did, as always, make sure to subscribe and click on the bell notification icon. I upload a couple videos per week on front-end development, graphic design, and all that cool stuff. All right, see you guys soon. Goodbye.